What if the most important chapter in our story isn't lost? It just rotted. We've dug a million years into the past and mostly pulled up two things: stones and bones. So we tell a simple story, slow, then suddenly airplanes and rockets. But this year, a team digging in Tanzania dropped a time bomb: bone tools, shaped, used, engineered from 1.5 million years ago. Not just rocks, not just luck, technology. If bones and wood vanish in ordinary soil, what else have we been missing? Here's the big idea. The archaeological record is biased. Stuff that rots doesn't usually make it. Stuff that rusts can vanish completely. So the deep past looks like a world of stone and a few lucky bones, and we build our entire narrative on that tiny, stubborn fraction that survives. Today, we'll do three things. Walk through the new 1.5 million year bone tool discovery that forces a rewrite. Show why wood, fibers, leather, and most metals ghost out of history. And rebuild a different picture, one where early humans weren't dumb, just invisible to us most of the time. Olduvai Gorge, ground zero for human origins. In 2025, researchers working the OGAP T69 area announced shaped bone tools in a Acheulean context, 1.5 million years old. These aren't random splinters. They're deliberately modified bones used for digging, perforating, and processing, a toolkit beyond stone. Why does this matter? Because the Acheulean, famous for its symmetrical hand axes, was always framed as stone mines using stone. This puts bones squarely on the workbench early. It says material choice was strategic. Bone is springy, resilient, and great for certain tasks stone isn't. That's design thinking, a million years earlier than we teach. Let's be clear, this isn't a civilization. It's not cities. It's better. It's tech. It's knowledge moving through generations, quietly, made of perishable stuff. The kind of tech you and I would miss if we only looked for stone. Archaeology is a crime scene where most of the evidence gets eaten. Here's the quick and dirty. In normal, aerated soils, wood decays fast, years to centuries, thanks to fungi and bacteria. Only in special environments, waterlogged, oxygen-poor wetlands, bone-dry deserts, deep freeze, does wood last millennia. That's why ships like the Mary Rose or Vasa survive in anaerobic waterlogged conditions, then need heroic conservation the moment they hit air. Fibers and leather, same story. Amazing if frozen or desert dry, otherwise they vanished. So prehistoric nets, woven bags, cordage, almost all gone. We know they existed from impressions and rare miracle finds. Bone mineral hydroxyapatite dissolves under acidic soils. Fluctuating water tables accelerate destruction. Even bones don't like most burial conditions. Now imagine bone tools. They're rare because they rot, not because we didn't make them. Iron in damp, aerated, chloride-rich soils can corrode to nothing. Over long timelines, objects can be fully mineralized or lost. Copper alloy artifacts can be heavily eaten by chlorides. At Sipan, Peru, substrates of Cu-AgAu alloys were almost completely corroded in burial. Gold is relatively inert. That's why we find gold jewelry. But that's survivor bias, not a real measure of ancient tech levels. Even gold often is impure and can degrade if alloyed. So when we say we only find stones and bones, that's not a verdict on human intelligence. It's a verdict on what doesn't rot. In Germany, a set of 8 wooden spears from Schöningen stunned archaeologists. Perfectly balanced hunting weapons. You read that right, wood, preserved because of exceptional conditions. Long framed is around 400,000 years ago. Recent work revises key layers to around 200,000 years ago and suggests Neanderthals likely made them. Think about the world we don't see because wood rarely survives. Throwing sticks, digging sticks, bowls, baskets, fish traps, sleds, cradles, crutches, frames. Most of prehistory's everyday tech was probably wood. At Katanda DIC, Middle Stone Age layers yielded barbed bone harpoons 90 to 80,000 years old, matched with catfish bones, organized seasonal fishing, gear maintenance, and probably knowledge of riverscapes across generations. That's craft and planning too. You've heard the story. Humans wake up around 40,000 years ago. But in Blombos Cave, South Africa, someone drew a cross-hatch pattern with an ochre crayon about 73,000 years ago. That's abstract representation, a mark that means more than itself, long before Europe's cave art heyday. Stone tool making goes deep. Oldovian and even pre-Oldovian Lomekwi's tools around 3.3 million years ago, probably Australopiths shaping rock. If they worked wood or bone too, it mostly vanished. Every once in a while, something complicated slips through the preservation filter, like the Antiquity mechanism, a Hellenistic analog computer with gears modeling the heavens around the 1st century BCE. We didn't think that level of gearing existed until the Middle Ages. Then one corroded device surfaced from a shipwreck and changed the plot. How many wooden or organic equivalents never got that miracle? Let's run a thought experiment. If we vanished tomorrow, what would the future archaeologists get? Concrete and stone survives in fragments for ages, though rebar corrodes. Plastics, a lot will photodegrade or fragment, many will persist in some form. Iron and steel, in the wet, aerated, salty soils, toast on long timelines. In deserts or anoxic clays, better. Copper alloy tech, patchy, can mineralize or dissolve. Silicon chips and wires, fragile, corrode, delaminate, and break. Paper, fabrics, and wood, gone in most places, survive in deserts, bogs, permafrost. If your civilization leans on organics and wood, you can be smart, organized, even brilliant, and 99.9% of your stuff just doesn't fossilize. You won't show up as cities and plinths. You'll show up as traces, stone points near riverfish bones, a few bone tools in a lucky layer, a pattern etched in ochre. That's why we only find stones and bones, not because humans were stuck, because nature was a shredder. You're saying there was an advanced civilization a million years ago? No. We're saying technology is broader than stone, and the survivors biased our stories. The 1.5 million year Olduvai bone tools show intentional manufacture with bone alongside stone in the Acunian, way earlier than most people think. That doesn't mean skyscrapers, it means capable minds choosing materials we rarely see. But we go from bones to rockets in 100 years. That line is great for drama and also kind of the point. The last 200 years leave durable signatures, rail beds, concrete, landfills. Prehistory signatures were often biodegradable. You're comparing loud evidence to quagga evidence. Isn't there art and ritual earlier than expected? Yeah. Blombos gives us abstract drawing of 73 Ka. Gatanda shows complex fishing gear 90 Ka. Wooden spears at Schoningen show weapon craft hundreds of thousands of years ago. These finds don't look like slow mines. They look like missing data finally peeking through. Human history isn't a staircase. It's a coastline, eroded, silted, revealed by tides. When a shaped bone from 1.5 million years ago rolls out of the dirt, it's not just a tool, it's a message. We've always been smarter than our fossils suggest, and the story we tell depends on what we choose to see when most of it is gone. If history leaves only what refuses to rot, what stories are we not telling yet? Hit subscribe and let's dig them up. Also, drop a comment. Which vanished technology would you bet existed a million years ago?
This documentary is not a gentle thought experiment. It's a forensic walkthrough. We'll look at specific artifacts, texts, and chemical evidence, from Sahugun's 16th century descriptions of Teonanacat to scholarly reconstructions of the Eleusinian Kaikian, and ask one blunt question. Did ancient people intentionally use psychoactive plants and fungi in religious rites? And did those experiences become the stories religions are built on? Some of these theories have been whispered in back rooms and shouted on talk shows. Others started as careful scholarship and then ballooned into controversy. We'll be direct. Where there's clear evidence, we'll say so. Where there's speculation, we'll label it. But at every step, we'll show you the artifacts or studies that let us make that call. All over the world, religious specialists, shamans, oracles, priests, used sensory techniques to produce visionary states. Drumming for hours, fasting, dancing, rhythmic chanting, isolation. These techniques are well documented and universal. But in many places, they were paired with something else, a substance taken to open the mind.
Those substances are not modern inventions. Archaeology, ethnography, and ancient texts show people using psychoactive plants and fungi for millennia, sometimes to heal, sometimes to divine, sometimes to commune. The implication? Chemically induced vision was a legitimate route to the sacred. We begin where the evidence is strongest and least disputed, Mesoamerica. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, missionaries recorded indigenous terms and rites. One word stands out: Teonanacatl, divine mushroom. The Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún described mushroom ceremonies in his Florentine Codex, and multiple colonial sources corroborate communal mushroom rituals used for divination and prophecy. This is a concrete anchor. We know the Aztecs used psilocybin-type mushrooms in religious contexts. That's not speculation, it's primary historic documentation. When we look at the Xochipilli statue, the Prince of Flowers, and the flora carved on the base, scholars see a ritual context for visionary plant use. Beyond Mesoamerica, visual art hints at ancient fungal cults. In Spain, the Selva Pascuala mural contains fungoid figures that some researchers argued depict neurotropic psilocybe mushrooms. The proposal dates their use to Europe to as early as 6,000 to 8,000 years before present. In Central America, carved mushroom stones found at sites like Caminaljuyu show stylized mushroom forms and are often interpreted as ritual paraphernalia. Those interpretations are contested. Art can be ambiguous, but the pattern is striking. Images and artifacts suggest ceremonial mushroom use across widely separated cultures. The idea that this is a global fluke becomes hard to maintain once you stack the examples. Now we shift from hard documentation to a famous and explosive possibility. For nearly 2 millennia, the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece were the most famous secret rites in the Mediterranean. Initiates reported life-altering visions and a promise of a better afterlife. But the rituals were secret. Participants could not speak of them under penalty of death. That secrecy left a gap, and some scholars filled that gap with a startling hypothesis. The kykeon, the initiatory drink, contained psychoactive compounds, possibly ergot derivatives, that triggered the visionary climax. The most influential modern statement of that idea appears in The Road to Eleusis, a book by R. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hofmann, and Carl Ruck. Hofmann was the chemist who discovered LSD. Together, they proposed that ergot-derived alkaloids in the kykeon could have produced the sacred revelations at Eleusis. Not every classicist accepts that. Critics point out that the traditional kykeon recipe described in ancient sources looks like barley, mint, or thyme, not a carefully prepared ergot brew. But the proponents answered with plausible preparation techniques and biochemical pathways for how ergot alkaloids could have been concentrated and made psychoactive. The upshot: the ergot kykeon theory remains active and debated in serious scholarship. Across the Eurasian steppe, another mysterious sacrament appears in ancient texts, the soma, the divine drink of the Rig Veda. Scholars have long argued what plant or combination of plants soma actually was. In the 20th century, R. Gordon Wasson suggested Amanita muscaria, the red and white fly agaric, as the candidate. Other scholars proposed ephedra, or complex mixtures that included Syrian rue or grasses. The key point is this: the Rig Vedic descriptions, talking about pressing and filtering the plant to make a sacred draught and linking it to the mountain realm, are compatible with multiple botanical candidates. Modern scholarship shows there's no single consensus. There are persuasive arguments on several sides. The story of soma demonstrates how a sacrament can be described in myth while its precise botanical identity is lost to time.
Now to the biggest controversy, Christianity.
In 1970, Dead Sea Scrolls scholar John Marco Allegro published The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, arguing that early Christianity encoded mushroom worship, and that language and ritual points to psychoactive sacraments. His book was sensational and, from the academic angle, widely rejected. In the last 5 years, Brian Murascu's The Immortality Key has reignited one of the most controversial theological debates of the modern era. The idea that the earliest Christian sacrament, the Eucharist, may have been rooted not just in wine and bread, but in a psychedelic tradition, stretching back to the mysteries of ancient Greece. Murascu's thesis connects the dots between the Eleusinian mysteries, secret rites performed annually for nearly 2,000 years in honor of Demeter and Persephone, and early Christian liturgy. At Eleusis, initiates consumed a secret potion, the kykeon, which some researchers argue may have been laced with psychoactive compounds derived from ergot or other plant and fungal alkaloids. But Murascu goes further. He argues that this entheogenic, that is, God-infused, tradition may have threaded itself into the earliest Eucharistic gatherings in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. And here's where the language gets interesting. The word Christos, long before it was applied to Jesus, already existed in ancient Greek medical and ritual contexts. Linguistically, it's a noun formed from the verb kryo, meaning to rub, to anoint. Applied to a person, it meant the anointed one. Applied to a substance, it literally meant ointment. Now think about that for a moment. Christos was not originally a name, but a title, and one deeply embedded in the world of oils, resins, perfumes, and possibly medicinal or psychoactive balms. The idea that early anointing oils might have had more than symbolic properties, perhaps psychoactive ones, is exactly the kind of possibility that makes scholars either lean in or slam the door. And that's the problem. Among mainstream Christian scholars, the idea of a psychoactive Eucharist is virtually taboo. The very suggestion threatens to undermine centuries of theological orthodoxy. Still, there are tantalizing breadcrumbs. One of the more intriguing comes from Ammon Hillman, Ph.D., a classicist specializing in ancient Greek and Roman pharmacy. Hillman has translated ancient medical and ritual texts that describe ointments and potions with mind-altering effects. His interpretations are, let's say, controversial. Critics accuse him of overreading the pharmacological implications. Yet tellingly, no other classicist seems eager to publicly debate him. Add to that the residue analyses. In recent years, archaeochemists have detected traces of alkaloids, cannabinoids, and other plant compounds in ancient vessels, some from early Christian-era contexts in the Mediterranean. There are even fragmentary recipes from the Greco-Roman world describing beverages in ointments, mixing wine, honey, herbs, and fungi. But here's the sober reality. While these findings might fit into a theory of sacramental entheogen use, they don't prove that early Christianity as a whole engaged in such a practice. At best, the evidence suggests that some local, possibly fringe Christian communities may have incorporated entheogenic elements into their rites, perhaps as a continuation of older pagan traditions. The responsible conclusion? It's plausible in certain pockets. It is not, and never was, the universal foundation of Christianity as practiced across the Roman Empire. Siberia recorded use of Amanita muscaria in ritual contexts. Shamans sometimes drank the urine of reindeer that had eaten the mushrooms, a crude but effective way to attenuate toxic effects and concentrate muscimol. The result? Altered states used for divination and healing. This practice is one of the clearest pieces of ethnographic evidence linking a specific mushroom to religious practice. Some scholars have argued that Norse berserkers used intoxicants, perhaps amanita or poppy extracts, to enter trance-like battle fury. Evidence is suggestive but thin. Saga descriptions, some skeletal chemistry, and circumstantial cultural parallels. Again, possible, not proven. Across the ocean, Australian Aboriginal cultures have complex ritual systems, many involving sensory deprivation, song, and other non-chemical means, but some groups used plant medicines to assist vision work. The global pattern continues. Multiple methods to access the sacred, sometimes chemical, sometimes not. What makes this whole project suddenly urgent is modern clinical science. Studies at institutions like Johns Hopkins have shown that psilocybin, the active compound in classic magic mushrooms, reliably occasioned profound mystical-type experiences in controlled settings. These experiences often produced long-term changes in mood, outlook, and spirituality. Put bluntly, the same kind of experience that ancient initiates described can be produced, in the lab, by psilocybin. Here's the straight assertive claim we'll stake on the table. Entheogens, plant and fungus-derived psychoactives, were in many cases intentionally used in ancient religious rituals. Where we have the most direct evidence, Mesoamerica, the link is undeniable. Where we have ambiguous but plausible evidence, Elysis, Soma, some Mediterranean rites, the case is credible, supported by experts and disputed by others. So the conservative but provocative conclusion is this: the chemical induction of altered states was a common route to religious experience, and those experiences shaped core religious narratives. Did organized religions later suppress, sanitize, or reframe those sacramental experiences into doctrine, priestly hierarchy, and allegory? That's where history gets political. There is evidence of suppression of non-orthodox rites, women's rituals, localized cult practices in late antiquity and medieval period. Whether that suppression was specifically aimed at hiding a mushroom sacrament is still debated. But the broader arc that sacred pharmacology lost ground as institutional religion centralized control is supported by historical patterns. So the next time someone tells the story of a prophet hearing the voice of a god, ask the quiet question: were they lifted by faith or guided by a fungus?
Long before Christianity, Islam, or Buddhism, humanity's first religion was the sky. Our ancestors didn't just look up for beauty, they looked up for survival. The sun told them when to plant and harvest. The stars told them when to migrate. The moon controlled the tides, animal behavior, even human fertility. And hidden in sight plain, right inside the world's sacred scriptures, is the oldest code of all: Astrotheology. The belief that religious stories and symbols are built on the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. In ancient Egypt, the sun god Ra was said to sail across the heavens each day, bringing warmth, light, and life to the world. Each night, Ra would descend into the underworld, battling darkness and chaos, only to be resurrected at dawn. Now think about this. A divine being who dies every evening, journeys into darkness, and returns in glory to bring salvation to humanity. That's not far from another story you know, the story of a man called the Light of the World. Even the Christian halo is a solar image. Art historians trace it back to ancient depictions of Apollo, Helios, and other sun gods. Over the course of a year, the sun appears to move through 12 constellations, the zodiac, 12 signs, 12 stages of the solar journey. Now compare that to religion. Pisces, the fish. The earliest Christians used the fish as their secret symbol. Aquarius, the water bearer. In Luke 22:10, Jesus tells his disciples to follow a man bearing a pitcher of water. Leo, the lion. In Revelation, Christ is called the Lion of Judah. These aren't random. Ancient writers layered cosmic cycles into sacred narratives so that every festival, every parable, every prophecy synced with the heavens. Even early Christian scholars like Origen of Alexandria admitted that Scripture often spoke in allegory, not to deceive, but to hide deeper truths for those mature enough to understand them. Why is Christmas on December 25th? Because long before Christianity, that date marked the rebirth of the sun in many pagan traditions. Here's why. From June to December, the sun's arc in the sky gets lower and the days shorter. The sun dies a little more each day until the winter solstice, the darkest time of the year. For 3 days after, its path barely moves. It appears motionless, dead. Then on December 25th, it rises higher again, reborn. Romans honored Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, on that date. Mithras, Horus, and Attis were all celebrated as being born at this time. Early Christians adopted the date for the birth of Jesus, blending old solar festivals into the new faith. Even the crucifixion has cosmic roots. On the spring equinox, the sun crosses the celestial equator, the cross in the heavens. Ancient skywatchers said the sun was crucified here before moving north toward the life-giving warmth of summer. To them, this wasn't just metaphor. The sun's movement literally determined whether crops would grow, whether animals would return, whether life itself could continue. Modern scholars agree on one thing. The world's religions are full of astronomical symbolism. Where they disagree is on the extent. Some argue these cosmic patterns were layered onto the lives of real historical figures, prophets, sages, and kings. Others believe the figures themselves may have been entirely symbolic from the start, personifications of the sun and stars, told in human terms to make the cycles relatable. Either way, the evidence is everywhere. Once you know how to read the sky, the stories change. You stop seeing only miracles and start seeing calendars, farming schedules, and celestial maps written as Holy Scripture. If you want to understand the roots of religion, don't just look in the temples or the texts. Look up. The blueprint has been above us the whole time.
Once you realize that the foundations of religion come from the stars, another question appears. Who kept this knowledge alive? Because history shows us something unusual. The further back we go, the clearer the sky-based myths are. But as organized religion took power, the symbols became hidden, layered under ritual and metaphor. It's as if the knowledge was deliberately veiled, only revealed to initiates. In Greece, the mystery schools of Eleusis taught initiates secret wisdom, often through rituals that used sacred plants, visions, and symbolic stories. In Egypt, priests guarded astronomical calendars that regulated agriculture and kingship itself. In Babylon, the Magi, star priests, charted planetary alignments, connecting them with prophecies. These were not religions for the masses. They were initiations into cosmic law, the idea that what happens above governs what happens below. As empires rose and fell, the torch passed into new hands. The Knights Templar were rumored to possess secret astronomical knowledge, hidden in the Temple of Solomon. The Freemasons, whose very name comes from the builders of stone, encoded cosmic allegories into architecture. Even the Gothic cathedrals of Europe are laced with zodiac imagery, solar alignments, and sacred geometry. Why? Because the Masons and initiates believed that buildings weren't just structures, they were star maps carved in stone. Think about the symbols you see everywhere. The all-seeing eye above the pyramid, the cross of Christianity, the crescent and star of Islam. These are not just random emblems. They are cosmic diagrams.
The eye in the triangle, that's the sun and the pyramid of heaven. The cross, the solar equinox. The crescent and star, the moon and Venus, guiding sailors and mystics for millennia. Even the US dollar bill is covered in astrotheological imagery, a modern echo of an ancient language. So why hide it? Why not teach everyone openly that religion was born from the stars? Because knowledge is power. If you know when the Nile will flood, or when the seasons shift, or when the planets align, you control food, trade, and prophecy itself. The priests, the kings, the secret orders, they kept the cosmic calendar to themselves, while giving the masses simple stories of gods and miracles. The allegory was public. The astronomy was private. Whenever open teaching of these truths surfaced, it was often crushed. Heretics were burned, libraries destroyed, orders outlawed. And yet, the knowledge never died. It went underground, into symbols, myths, and secret brotherhoods. Each generation passed it on, waiting for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. From shamans and priests to Templars and Masons, the same truth has been whispered across time. Religion is not just about Earth, it is a mirror of the heavens, and those who hold the keys to the stars hold the keys to human belief itself.
If religion began as a mirror of the stars, then the question is, who still holds that mirror today? From the Vatican's obelisk, standing like a frozen ray of the sun, to Washington, D.C.'s Capitol dome, aligned with the solstices, the fingerprints of ancient astrotheology are everywhere in our modern world. Historians note that the Catholic Church absorbed not only the rituals of Rome, but its celestial calendar. December 25th, the birthday of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, became the day Christians celebrate Christ's birth. Easter is still calculated by the spring equinox and full moon, the same cycles pagans once used to honor fertility and rebirth. Even the Masons, inheritors of secret esoteric traditions, built entire cities according to cosmic geometry. Washington, D.C. itself is a map of the heavens, its streets forming Masonic compasses, its monuments aligned to celestial bodies. But maybe the bigger tragedy is not control. Maybe it's amnesia. We have forgotten the sky. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived under the stars. We knew their cycles like we know our phones today. The heavens told us when to plant, when to migrate, when to build, and when to pray. But in forgetting the sky, have we also forgotten ourselves? Religion was never meant to trap us. It was a cosmic language, a way of seeing humanity as part of something far larger, far older, and far more beautiful.
Hello and welcome back to Hidden Archaeology. Today we're looking into one of history's most fascinating phenomena, and one that might shed light on origins of our own religion. Imagine worshipping airplanes as gods and building makeshift runways in the hope of attracting more. That's just the tip of the iceberg in the intriguing world of cargo cults. Now let me explain. The term cargo cult emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in Melanesia, a region in the southwest Pacific that includes Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and parts of Fiji and New Caledonia. However, the term cargo cult itself was not used until after World War II. These Pacific islands, isolated for centuries from outside influence, you could say still living in Stone Age, all of a sudden witness man, similar to them in appearance coming from the skies, or landing by impossible floating metal. Bringing technology with them never seen before. These beings never needed to hunt, but yet they were never hungry. They wielded the power of fire and light in their hands. Who else but gods could possess such power and technology? And thus, the indigenous populations developed religious movements centered around the expectation of receiving material wealth, or cargo, from supernatural sources. One of the earliest recorded instances resembling a cargo cult was in 1919 in the Madang region of Papua New Guinea, where a movement led by a man named Yali sought to bring about a transformation that would lead to the arrival of ancestral spirits with cargo. This was part of a broader pattern of millenarian movements in the region, where indigenous people anticipated a radical change in their circumstances, often including the arrival of material wealth. And honestly, who would not be? Imagine all you ever know changes in a heartbeat. No longer need to hunt or fish. Food comes in a can now, dropped from the sky. These foods were vastly different from the traditional island diets and were seen as exotic and desirable, which included corned beef and rice. Other material goods included clothing and fabric, tools, hardware, and other equipment for construction and maintenance work, which were much more advanced than the indigenous technology on the island. Modern medicines and medical equipment, which were far more advanced than the traditional healing methods on the islands, were also included. Items such as soap, cigarettes, and mirrors, which were novel to the islanders, were also part of the cargo. And what I feel is the most important cargo indigenous received: radios, watches, and later, items like refrigerators and vehicles, which were seen as powerful and magical due to their unknown technology and functions. Now look back at some of our older religions and imagine another entity coming down to land in advanced crafts that you don't even have vocabulary to describe. How would our ancestors describe such an encounter? Would they start to worship them? During World War II, we can find the most famous example of cargo cults, as it was during this time that the Alliance was getting ready to attack Japan and started occupying surrounding islands, building airstrips and mounting equipment and vehicles needed for combat. So you can only imagine these simple indigenous people with stone ape technology all of a sudden being thrown into the 20th century. In the late 1930s or early 1940s, John Frum movement emerged on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu. John Frum is often depicted as an American, though his exact identity and nature vary. In some versions, he is a messianic figure promising wealth and prosperity to the islanders. The central belief of the movement is that John Frum will return, bringing with him a bounty of cargo, goods, wealth, and food, which will usher in a new era of prosperity. Followers of the John Frum movement engage in various rituals. These have included the creation of symbolic airstrips to attract cargo planes, as well as construction of straw airplanes and conducting military-style parades. Interestingly enough, John Frum is celebrated annually on February 15th, and although the number of practitioners has declined over the years, the movement persists to this day. Such a phenomenon illustrates the human brain's capacity to believe in something greater than oneself. Also, cargo cults show how belief systems can adapt to new circumstances, incorporating new elements, like the figure of John Frum, into traditional beliefs. This capacity is a fundamental aspect of human psychology and culture. While the specific beliefs of cargo cults might seem unusual, the underlying psychological mechanisms are universal. All cultures have belief systems that help explain the world, provide a moral framework, and offer a sense of belonging. Whether these are religious, scientific, or ideological, they all fulfill similar roles in human society. Now that we know more about cargo cults, I would like to ask why the media calls it a cult and not a religion. I'll leave that one for you to answer in the comments. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay open-minded.